ABB Formula E. It's today. It's electric. It's our sustainable future. Heroes will rise. Inspired moments will make history. ABB is a driver of progress. And for us, this is more than a race. It's about embedding sustainability in everything we do and connecting a young generation with exciting city center racing. As teams working together with care and courage, we innovate technologies to tackle global challenges today and tomorrow. Because this partnership represents ABB's vision of a better future. With reduced carbon emissions, preserved resources, and greater social progress. ABB Formula E. It's more than a race.
A very good morning from a rainy New York. My name is Theodor Swedjemark and I'm ABB's Chief Communications and Sustainability Officer, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you to Driving the Electric Transportation Economy, a virtual Formula E event. We are live here from New York City, as I mentioned, and I'm at the William Whale Hotel here in Brooklyn, just a short distance from the site of the 2021 ABB New York City E-Prix, which will be taking place tomorrow and on Sunday and airing live on both CBS and the CBS Sports Network. I'm joined here by Jamie Reigle, CEO of Formula E, and Stephanie Medeiros, an ABB e-mobility account management leader. And over the next hour and a half, we will be joined virtually by some of the biggest champions of electric vehicles and electrification in the United States. U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm will join FIA Formula E race driver Sebastian Buemi in conversation. New York City's own U.S. Representative Paul Tonko will share a view from Capitol Hill, and we have gathered a panel of leaders in the industry to discuss how federal policy can help catalyze the electric transportation economy. Finally, after we conclude the live program, you will all have the opportunity to explore our virtual environment that we have created to learn more about Formula E technology and the race this weekend. But before we get started, I would like to say a few words about ABB Formula E and the future of electric mobility. The ABB FIA Formula E World Championship is more than a race. It excites people of all ages about the possibilities of electric mobility and clean energy. It's a test bed for innovation and development of electric vehicles, EV chargers, and the future of transportation. The advanced technologies that we will see on the Formula E track tomorrow and on Sunday, from batteries to chargers, could soon be available to all of you. But it's not only about fast cars. Sustainability is what makes advancements in electric vehicles the most exciting. And here in the US, the transportation sector accounts for the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And a fast transition to electric vehicles will be critical to avoid the worst effects of climate change. Fortunately, the electrification revolution is starting to take off here in the US. Many major vehicle manufacturers have announced ambitious commitments to go entirely electric in the next 10 to 15 years. New models of battery electric trucks, SUVs, and sedans are announced almost every month. And over the next decade, EV sales are expected to rise from only 2.5% to over 30% of new sales in the US. ABB has already provided more than 3,000 DC fast chargers in the US to help charge all of these EVs. And we hope to play a critical role in expanding the electric infrastructure needed for this future transition. And of course, e-mobility is more than just cars. We also need to electrify buses, delivery trucks, construction vehicles, but also marine vessels, which in the US produce roughly the same amount of CO2 emissions as the entire commercial sector. One quick example. Last year, the US first all-electric ferry was introduced in the Niagara Falls, and every day hundreds of tourists board the Maid of the Mist thanks to ABB zero-emission marine technology. And ABB technologies like these will help move industry and society from combustion fuels to electricity, increased energy savings, and cut CO2 emissions. And the innovation and investment in electrification that we are seeing across the country is a big reason why we keep growing in the US and continuing to invest and expand our already 20,000 strong American employee base today. When President Biden took office, he underscored that US domestic action on climate change goes hand in hand with international leadership. The United States is now back in the Paris Agreement. In April, Biden convened a climate leaders summit where the US had committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% already by 2030. And now 4 months before the UN Climate Change Conference, or COP26 in Scotland, ABB, together with many other industry players, stand ready to bring practical and technological solutions that can help enable these governments' ambitions. When industry, local, state, and national governments work hand in hand, we can really accelerate the speed of electrification. So you say how? By investing in research and development, expanding tax credits for vehicles and charging infrastructure, but also supporting the growth of manufacturers of electric vehicles, chargers, but also batteries. Sustainability will underpin the economy of the next century, from energy-efficient buildings and clean energy to electric transportation. Developing, manufacturing, and deploying these zero-emission transportation technologies will not only lower cost to consumers, but also create new careers and help combat climate change. The e-mobility economy is coming, and we are all here to do our part in bringing the benefits to everyone. Formula E is all about the future of e-mobility. And we're fortunate enough to have Jamie Reigle, CEO of Formula E, with us here today. Jamie just doesn't understand what's happening under the hood of these cars, but he can also speak about the larger trends in electric vehicle technology. And he has been an invaluable partner both to us, ABB, and a true visionary guiding Formula E's mission over the last 2 years. So very warm welcome, Jamie.
Thanks very much, Theo. It's great to be here.
Likewise, great to have you. So many of those joining us here today are joining us virtually, and they haven't had that much exposure to Formula E in the past. So I'll start up with a couple of easy questions. What is Formula E, and why is it so important?
Well, so Formula E is an electric car racing series. So the cars are fully electric, and we are the first and the only fully electric car racing series in the world. And that's the primary point of differentiation. Number two, we race in cities. You know, car racing typically happens at remote tracks, dedicated facilities outside of the urban areas. We try to bring electric mobility and electric racing into the heart of cities. And the reason for that is we believe that electric mobility will be catalyzed most quickly by consumers in cities. And so we can do that because the cars are quiet, because they're electric, they have zero emissions, and they're environmentally friendly, and they work in that environment. And so, you know, we're trying to build this sport. We're trying to use the sport as a way to promote electric mobility and to tell a story around what we think a brighter future can look like.
Cool. Thank you. So now we're in season 7 of the World Championship. It's now a FIA World Championship. And looking back over these years, I mean, where's the championship come from, and in such a short place of time? What has it achieved?
Well, we started 7 years ago with literally an entrepreneurial vision on a napkin by our founder, Alejandro Agag, who had a vision around electric sport, electric motor racing tied to a climate change narrative. At that time, everyone thought that was quite a wild idea. Would the cars work at all? Would consumers and fans be interested? And we've been able to show that, you know, absolutely those things are true. In the beginning, for example, the battery was only powerful enough and had enough capacity to be able to last for about 25 minutes. And so we had to swap cars during the race. And that was just an indication of where the technology was in 2014. Today, the races are longer, the battery capacity is much more significant, the density and the power that they can generate is much more significant. So there's been a huge push on the technology side. And then from a consumer side, ultimately we're trying to build what I call a tier 1 sport, meaning a sport that people recognize and love around the world. And we've been really excited about how we've been able to do that in terms of pulling in fans, racing in some of the most iconic cities. We're here in New York, we race in Paris, we race in Monaco, we race in Rome, Mexico City, Seoul. So we're all over the world trying to bring this message, which fundamentally is a global challenge that we're all addressing.
Cool. And what about the future? I mean, how do you see this championship growing, and what can you tell us about how this is going to all evolve going forward?
Well, there's a couple areas, right? So one is building the sport. I mean, ultimately, we have to be clear that what we're doing here is sport, and meaning it's top tier human performance. In our case, it's a mix of drivers and the engineering talent coming together as a team to try to compete with their competitors and win a car race. And that's what emotionalizes, the connection with the mobility story. So we have to build the sport. How do we do that? We have the best drivers. We're bringing in some of the best teams and manufacturers. We have Porsche, Mercedes, Nissan, Jaguar, Mahindra. Some of the biggest car companies in the world are making big bets around their ability to showcase their capabilities in a competitive environment. There's a technology roadmap that's really important. So right now, we're in what we call Gen 2. We'll be moving to Gen 3 in 18 months. The car will be lighter, about 100 kilos lighter, and the reason for that is the battery is becoming much smaller due to the advancement in technology. 100 kilowatt more power in the engine, and so I'm actually not a car engineer, despite your kind words at the beginning, but more power, lighter, means much faster, right? And so that's going to lead to much more exciting racing. And then the third piece on the technology is we have what we call fast charging coming in, so the ability to charge in a very rapid way, perhaps during the race. And that's what's kind of interesting about Formula E. Most sports, traditional sports, don't change, right? The rules have been set for a long time. Formula E evolves as the technology improves. So I mentioned the car swap before. In Gen 3, we're going to have this opportunity to charge in a rapid way. That opens up all kinds of possibilities for us around how long the race can be, whether there can be a pit stop in the middle to be able to showcase that technology capability. So there's a lot of evolution that happens. And if we can do those two things together, evolve the technology and make sure we're keeping in mind the consumer and building a sport that people really want to watch, then I think the future is bright.
Sounds exciting. So we're in New York City, iconic place. It's not the capital of the US, but it's the capital of US media presence, etc. What does it really mean to be here with such a future forward-leaning sport in the heart of US kind of excitement?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I mean, the United States is a really important market for us as Formula E, for our partners, our commercial partners, for all of our car manufacturers. It's one of it is the biggest economy in the world. It's one of the most innovative and a source of a beacon of innovation and consumer trends. So we want to be in the United States first and foremost. New York, of course, especially in the minds of folks from outside of the U.S., it connotes America, right? It's this place of hope and excitement. So it's a really interesting city, culturally relevant. And so for us to be able to come here is pretty special. I mean, you have great iconic sporting moments that happen in New York. There aren't any other car races, so we're unique in that context. And as I said before, we race in cities, right? And we want to bring our series into the heart of the cities. We did some interesting activations this week with our car in Times Square, and of course we're going to be racing here in Brooklyn on Saturday and Sunday. So we're delighted to be in New York and really appreciate the welcome that we've received.
Cool. Sustainability. You mentioned Alejandro's original vision, purpose-driven. Sustainability is an integral part of ABB's purpose and what we like to bring to the world. But how do you see this? How core is sustainability as such to Formula E and to your messaging and your daily business?
It's absolutely core, and I think what's really important to say is it's authentic. We're the only sport that was ever founded with sustainability embedded in the purpose, right? It was all about how do we use motorsport, to be able to showcase the effects of climate change and the potential for electric mobility to play a part in reducing emissions. So we don't apologize for that. We're proud of it. We're authentic, and that's really embedded in who we are. That being said, we've been around for 7 years. We're still a young company, but the consumer expectations, the government expectations, corporates, the entire agenda is completely shifted, and the bar continues to get raised. And so it's interesting. When I started 2 years ago, I thought, hey, we're the good guys. We are focused on clean mobility, and that in itself is a strong virtue. But the reality is we travel all around the world to put our race series on, so we do have emissions that are tied to logistics, that are tied to the fan attendance. And so what we're trying to do is look at how do we reduce that emission base as much as we can. And then actually, just recently we announced that we're the only sport that is net zero carbon from inception. So we're not making a projection around where we'll be in 2030. We're saying, okay, we'll offset every emission that we've had from day one, and we'll commit to continue to do so in the future, so that we, if you will, race with no trace. And we view ourselves as leaders in this industry, and net zero carbon wasn't something we set out to do, but because of the consumer expectations and how we view ourselves as a beacon on sustainability, we said we really have to do that. And then we work really closely, with our partners such as ABB to try to figure out, okay, as we take this series around the world, the challenge we're trying to address is global. We must go all around the world, right? We can't hide from that. That will lead to inevitable emissions. What can we do to be investing in regional projects to be able to, draw attention to these challenges and also reduce our own footprint while we're at it?
Good. Thank you so much, Jamie, for joining us here. I'd like to say a special thanks to Jamie and for sharing all his insights. And I know you have a busy agenda today, so we'll let you go in a little bit here for an exciting weekend ahead of you. Next, I would like to introduce Stephanie Medeiros, who is also sitting with me here. She's the e-mobility global account management leader at ABB. And whether it's about electric cars, buses, or ferries, Stephanie knows the technology inside and out. And we are extraordinarily lucky at ABB to have her as part of the team. Stephanie, thank you very much for being with us here.
Thank you so much, Theo. It's such a pleasure to be here. And Jamie, so exciting to hear about the Formula E developments. I'm so happy to be here in New York City to watch the race, because whether you're watching the race live or in virtual, it's so fascinating to watch a race, because what you're watching is the future of e-mobility, as it's been said. So e-mobility market is obviously so excited, and I'm happy to be here to talk about it for the next couple of minutes. So the first question is, why e-mobility? Why electric cars? Well, the facts are that CO2 levels of the world are an all-time high, and they keep rising. And that causes the Earth's temperature to rise as well. Also, tens of thousands of Americans die each year from auto emissions. So it's clear that now more than ever, it's important to switch to sustainable transport and electric vehicles. The good news is that we're not so far away from an electric vehicle world, and actually the transition is happening right now. So there's a few things that are helping move this along. The first is that the price of electric vehicles to consumers is decreasing. A large part is due to the battery prices significantly decreasing year over year. A few years ago in 2010, battery prices were about $1,100 per kilowatt hour, and today they're about $130 per kilowatt hour, and it'll continue to decrease. The other thing that helps with EV transition is technology advancements, both on the battery side and also on the charging infrastructure side. So on the battery side, there's lots of improvements in the range and the chemistries of the battery, and also battery manufacturing. And on the charging side, there's more and more chargers being installed, and also chargers are really fast, and they continue to be very fast. A few years ago, we thought that 50 kilowatts was considered fast, but now charging can happen at 350 kilowatts. That can charge a car in less than 8 minutes. So we know we're in this EV transition, but how fast will electric cars take over the roads? Well, sooner than you may think. I'd like to show you this graph that demonstrates just how fast this is happening. So this is the global passenger vehicle market. And as you can see, from 2018 to 2022, this is the stage that we're in right now. It's a critical phase. It's the early adoption phase. And that's where utilities, fleets, and also the industry is coming together, and they're beginning to invest in EVs. So numbers of EVs on the road are going slowly but steadily up. But as of the year 2022, it'll really significantly increase all the way up to the year 2040, where 100% of vehicles purchased will be electric. It's in this phase right now, the early adoption phase, that there's critical things that are happening. First, as it was said before, car makers are going all in, and they're investing and producing 100% of EVs, some as early as the year 2030, so it's just around the corner. And the other thing is that there's regulations that are being put in place, such as the California Zero Emission Vehicle Mandate, and also the European Union's CO2 emissions standard. All these regulations really help to limit the amount of polluting cars on the roads and help with the EV transition. The other thing that's obviously helping with the EV transition is the ABB Formula E. The work that the ABB Formula E does in promoting electric mobility is so important and so significant. So there's a few things that the races do in order to promote this. Of course, it's been said before that when it comes to creating awareness about e-mobility, the races do that. The fact that they're in city centers or in busy areas such as here in Brooklyn, it really helps amplify the message of sustainability. So the other thing that happens also is technology advancements, and the newest technologies of e-mobility are being tested right there on the racetrack. Then the improvements are brought to mass market vehicles that you and I can drive in our everyday lives. So there you have it, a very quick nutshell of the e-mobility and the e-mobility market and how the ABB Formula E helps in drive electric mobility. So for all of you watching, definitely tune in for the race weekends. It'll be action-packed, I'm sure. And remember, what you're watching is more than a race. It's the future of e-mobility. Jamie, Theo, have a great weekend as well.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for sharing that. Very exciting. Next, I'm very delighted to introduce a conversation between two of the biggest EV champions on the planet. As a member of President Joe Biden's so-called Jobs Cabinet, United States Energy Secretary Jennifer N. Granholm has been traveling the country championing electric vehicles and the many benefits e-mobility bring to Americans, from green jobs to clean air. Meanwhile, Sebastian Buemi is a champion of another kind. He won the Formula E championship back in 2016, has more Formula E wins to his name than any other driver, and you will see him racing again for Nissan E-Dams tomorrow and Sunday. Earlier, Secretary Granholm and Sebastian Buemi had a chance to chat with each other about Formula E and the future of electric vehicles. Few people move as fast as Sebastian on the track, and as a Michiganer, few people appreciate a fast, well-built car much more than Secretary Granholm. Let's see what they learned.
Well, hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here helping you all kick off this year's Formula E New York City E-Prix. Now, I gotta say, DOE and Formula E have a lot in common. We're all about, all right, this is a little corny, but we're all about staying ahead of the curve. We're always hyping people up about the solutions of the future, and we are both obsessed with electric vehicles. So who better for me to compare notes with than the legendary Sebastian Buemi, one of the most successful drivers in Formula E history and an EV aficionado, just like me. Sebastian, I'm so thrilled that you are here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Madam Secretary. I'm really happy to be here with you guys today.
All right, good. Well, so if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask you a few questions because you are an e-vehicle aficionado. So tell us what attracted you to Formula E? How does it compare, for example, to the other racing series that you've driven in?
Yeah, so I've been racing in Formula One a few years ago. I'm racing in endurance racing, including the 24 Hours of Le Mans. I'm sure you've heard of that race. And since 2014, I'm now racing in Formula E. So it's been quite a few years ago that we started this championship. And obviously back then, we were doing a 45-minute race with two cars. We had to swap cars because the battery technology back then was not good enough to obviously do the whole race with one single car. And now since a couple of years, we are racing with the single car with a much faster car. We have a much longer range. And obviously, as a racing driver, I've been attracted by the fact that this, for me, was the future from the very beginning. Obviously, I was not expecting this kind of improvement over the years. So, yeah, since I've joined the ABB Formula E Championship, I'm really happy because just behind me we have the simulator we are using to get up to speed with the new tracks, including the New York E-Prix this weekend. And yes, I can't wait to be back in New York. We missed it last year, so I'm happy to be back.
That is so great. Well, let me just say, I am an EV owner. I lease a Chevy Bolt. I know it's no race car, but honestly, it really is the best car I've ever had. And I've never looked back since going electric. So I'm curious on your side of things as somebody who used to drive Formula One internal combustion engine vehicles. So how has driving an electric race car changed your perspective on EVs?
I think clearly today we are at the crossing point where the electric cars are just better than the normal combustion cars. The range has increased massively. And today, to drive an electric car, I live in Switzerland, it's quite cold in the winter. You get the heating on and it directly warms up the car. I'm a dad now since a few years, and I'm happy to try to improve the future, get sustainable. And clearly, I can charge my car at home. It's easy. I have no issues driving that car. It is powerful. It's looking good. So, I think everyone should obviously move and try to get an electric car as soon as possible.
From your mouth to God's ears. Of course, Formula E is more than just a race, because you're seeing the future of these electric vehicles unfold before your very eyes every year. I'm wondering what that has been like. I mean, how fast does technology innovation seem to be moving to you?
Yeah, it's been moving pretty fast. As you can imagine, the FIA and Formula E have tried to come up with a regulation that can obviously keep the cost down, because the idea is to be sustainable also for the championship. So it's an amazing platform that we have in the ABB Formula E Championship, but at the same point, we want to make it sustainable in terms of budget and also in terms of being a laboratory for the normal road car manufacturer. So as I said previously, we are now in the second generation of cars. We have one more year with those cars, and then we will go to the third generation of cars. So to make it simple, basically 75% of the car is the same for the entire grid. You can work on 25%, and the rules basically are pushing you to develop your own powertrain and become more and more efficient. So we've been trying very hard to increase the efficiency in the gearbox, in the electric motor, the inverters, and everyone has the same power output out of the battery. So the only thing is to try to use the best possible that energy in the fastest possible way. And as I said, now we have top speed of 170 miles an hour, where just a few years ago, we just had a top speed of 140. And we now don't change cars midway through the race. So that's basically showing that the battery technology has improved massively. And obviously the cars are getting faster and faster. Every time we come to New York, the track is very similar. And every year the cars are getting faster. They are beating records. So obviously it's a very exciting time. And, I can't wait to discover the new generation of cars that we will get in a couple of years' time.
So it seems to me that the technology that you're seeing on the track is going to be available in the cars that we all are driving, because we're working on it at DOE. We're really focused on research and development that's going to make EVs easier to manufacture, to deploy, to enjoy. We're working on energy efficiency inside of the vehicles as well. You should know that since January 20th, we at Department of Energy have already invested about $362 million in electric vehicles and in batteries, and that's going to help us to build on these incredible breakthroughs that we've already made over the last decade, like, for example, slashing the cost of battery packs on our way to making EVs cost competitive with internal combustion engines. And we're also working on decreasing battery recharge times, which is something I'm sure you're concerned about too. Our goal right now is to get less than 15 minutes for a 300-mile range for everyday citizens. And now we're also focused on scaling up American battery production across the entire manufacturing supply chain. And that's going to help us to procure and deploy EV batteries at the speed and the scale that we need to reach our climate and our clean energy goals, at the same time as it creates good jobs for our people. So all of that work is really coming together to drive down the overall cost of an electric vehicle. And of course, the goal here is to make it more accessible to the American family. It's a big part of our philosophy at the Department of Energy, which is that America's solutions to both the climate crisis and our economic issues, jobs and climate, can be one and the same. And of course, electric vehicles are going to play a huge role. So what are you most hopeful about in this transition to electric transportation? I wonder what benefits you want to see electric vehicles bringing to communities around the world.
Yeah, so it's great to hear that obviously Americans are pushing very hard to get that switch done. Obviously, I live in Europe. I come from Switzerland. We are based in Europe. And clearly, everyone is pushing quite hard in developing those technologies. And clearly, we need to address that climate issue we have. It's a big one. And I think that, we have to start today and not tomorrow. So obviously, step by step, I'm really happy to see that in my city, I see more and more electric charging points. I see that the technology is improving. As you just explained, the time to recharge the cars is getting every time faster. So I think I want obviously to use Formula E to bring a message across that people should not be scared to buy an electric car today. We have good range. We can recharge the battery in most of the places now in most of the big cities. And clearly, I think that, in the future, it's not anymore a question of if, it's just a question of when everyone will drive an electric car.
I love it. So right now you are in New York, and the undisputed capital of the media world. I'm wondering why, if you could say a word about why it's so important to bring events like Formula E to America.
Well, I think it's, first of all, a good show. So we want to put on a good show for the American people. I think since Formula E has started, we've been coming to the US every year. And for us, we want to spread the message again that electric cars are fun, they're fast, they're good looking. And, hopefully we will get a lot of people coming and watching us. And we will come back in the future, potentially adding another race in the US. That would be great. But, we just want to show that the technology is improving. We are obviously, everyone is pushing very hard. We have lots of manufacturers involved in Formula E. Obviously, my team, Nissan, but Porsche, Mercedes, Audi, BMW. So they're all there. They're all there to improve the cars. And obviously, I hope that we will see some American manufacturers very soon on the grid.
That's the hope. So I'm here in Washington, which is, of course, the capital of the American policymaking world. And just quickly, just to let you know, I mean, EVs are going to play a big role in achieving the President Biden's ambitious goal of getting to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Transportation is responsible for the biggest share of America's greenhouse gas emissions across the economy. And it's why he's committed to delivering these historic once-in-a-generation investments that are going to help us get there. And of course, while creating these millions of jobs, he's negotiated a bipartisan infrastructure framework that will allow us to build a national network of these 500,000 electric vehicle chargers, which you noted is super important in Europe. It's super important that we fill in the gaps here in the United States. I was just in Brooklyn, as a matter of fact, last week for the unveiling of Revel's new EV fast charging super hub. And it was so cool to imagine these kind of hubs all over the map, strategically placed, if you will, to be near where you work and where you live, so you never have to worry about losing a charge. So it's very exciting. These investments are going to do so much to get more people driving EVs while cleaning up our air and saving money. And we've just got to jam on the accelerator here. So that's why we're really grateful to folks like Sebastian and everyone at Formula E for helping us spread the word about how important electric vehicles are while looking so very cool doing it. Sebastian, it was such a pleasure chatting with you, and really best of luck tomorrow.
Thank you very much. I hope to see you very soon on a racetrack in the future. But thanks a lot for taking the time, and I'm really happy to see your administration and everyone in the US obviously committed to improving and getting those electric cars on the road.
All right. Love it. right from the horse's mouth. Thanks again, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Very interesting stuff there. Secretary Granholm highlighting the importance of how government policy is needed to jumpstart the adoption of EVs. In the meanwhile, Jamie had to leave us here. He is going now to meet all the team principals. As mentioned, he has a tight schedule, so he sends his best regards. But next, we will hear from one of the biggest EV advocates in the Capitol Hill, Representative Paul Tonko from New York. As the chair of the House Subcommittee on Environmental Climate Change, Representative Tonko plays a key role in moving the US towards a clearer and more sustainable future. He has introduced legislation to invest in transportation electrifications through grants and rebates to deploy electric vehicles, charging stations, and zero-emission buses. So without further ado, for you all, a message from Congressman Tonko.
Good morning. I'm Paul Tonko, and I represent New York's 20th Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives. I also have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Environment and Climate Change. I want to thank ABB, Jamie Reigle, and Formula E for the opportunity to join with you this morning. I'm sorry we could not be together in person, but I do want to express my excitement to have Formula E come to my home state of New York. This is a great showcase for the capabilities of battery electric vehicles and further proof that the future is electric and that future is coming sooner than we thought. I believe federal policies and investment can help drive the transition to a cleaner transportation system that will create new opportunities for consumers and new jobs for Americans, all while combating climate change. As you know, Congress and President Biden have been negotiating a major infrastructure package. It is still unclear what that package may include or how big it may be, but in all of the proposals, from the President's American Jobs Plan to the Senate Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework, EVs play a significant role. And for me and many other climate-focused members, I hope we can secure an even greater share of funding for zero-emission transportation. Decarbonizing the transportation sector is a high priority for many members of Congress, and we have tried to pursue a wide range of policies to help us achieve that goal. To me, it all starts with research and development, and that's why Formula E is so exciting. We get to see cutting-edge equipment in action, and faster charging in these high-performance settings could lead to breakthroughs that enable better, more innovative products in the consumer market. R&D is going to allow us to have cheaper, lighter batteries with longer durations and equipment capable of charging those batteries much more quickly. Beyond R&D, I am also focused on deployment policies that will make EVs more affordable, charging more accessible, and increase domestic manufacturing capacity. It is critical that we pursue a wide range of policies because the EV market and consumer habits are still taking shape. I don't want to prejudge what types of vehicles or charging equipment will become the most popular and needed. This has been the strategy of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, upon which I serve, which has developed major climate legislation known as the Clean Future Act. Our Clean Future Act shares a lot of qualities with President Biden's American Jobs Plan. We have proposed a nearly 1,000-page bill that covers every sector of our economy to achieve net zero emissions by no later than 2050. It also has a national clean electricity standard, investments in buildings and energy efficiency, a national climate bank, and many more provisions for environmental justice and worker transition. And it makes major investments in clean transportation, including electrification of ports and school buses, funding EPA's Diesel Emissions Reduction Act program and DOE's Clean Cities program, and a wide array of policies for EV charging build-out, everything from grants to rebates to model building codes to cleaning up our federal fleet. This includes a bill I've authored called the EV Infrastructure Rebate Act, which would provide rebates for workplace, multifamily, and publicly accessible charging stations. I believe this sort of program is critical to meet future EV drivers where they are. We need to provide charging options that align with where people's expected charging needs will be. Their offices, their grocery stores, their nearby parking garage. It is my hope that this program can be complementary to the approaches being developed for long-distance interstate travel along transportation corridors. Our climate proposal, like the President's plan, also provides support for domestic manufacturing of zero-emission vehicles and equipment, including expanding DOE's Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Program to cover medium and heavy-duty vehicles and reforming the Domestic Manufacturing Conversion Grant Program to allow existing manufacturing facilities to retool to build plug-in electric vehicles right here in the United States. Ideally, all of these investments will be paired with tax credits from another committee to build a comprehensive plan for the sector. Ultimately, the process to get a major bill passed this year is still unclear. But I do think we all realize the tremendous opportunity before us, and I know that there are many people intent on making the most of it. To me, building back better means modernizing our infrastructure and rebuilding our economy for a more competitive future, not the fading dynamics of the past. And a clean transportation system is foundational. I am committed to making that happen, and I will continue to use my position in the House to fight for the most ambitious infrastructure bill that can be enacted. So like you, I'm eager to see how these negotiations unfold over the next few weeks. So I thank you again for inviting me to participate this morning. I do look forward to working together to get an electric vehicle investment package over that finish line this year. Thank you.
What an important reminder of the role that Congress plays in accelerating electrification in America. Thank you very much, Representative Tonko, for your leadership on this topic. So, we've heard from the Biden administration and from Congress, and now it's time for the industry perspective. So, I will hand it over to Joe Britton, the Executive Director of the Zero Emission Transportation Association, who will introduce his panel of industry experts.
Good morning, and thank you, Theo. My name is Joe Britton. I'm the Executive Director of the Zero Emission Transportation Association, or ZETA. We are a public interest nonprofit of 60 member companies advocating for 100% electric vehicle sales by 2030. We represent manufacturers, battery companies, charging businesses, critical material supply chain providers, and electric utilities that are leading the way in this space. Now, as we've already noted, EVs are undoubtedly the defining product of the new automotive economy. And the United States has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reclaim our global automotive leadership to the benefit of both the American worker and consumers. And the choice we face is clear. We can either cultivate an advanced vehicle sector, one that will be on display this weekend with Formula E, or we cede this economic opportunity to others. So implementing the right federal policies is paramount. By expanding consumer incentives and investing in domestic manufacturing, the federal government can choose to support an ascendant EV market, which will in turn boost American economic competitiveness and create good-paying jobs, also protecting public health and the environment. Now, in this panel, we'll discuss in greater detail how the federal government can catalyze an electric transportation economy, and we're joined by experts from the auto manufacturing, electric utility, and EV charging industries. Our panel includes Anna Schneider, Senior Vice President and Head of Public Affairs at Volkswagen, Fabio Mantovani, Vice President for E-Mobility at the New York Power Authority, Paul Feenstra, Director of Government Relations at PACCAR, who owns brands such as Kenworth and Peterbilt, and Asaf Nagler, the Senior Director of Government Relations at ABB, a sponsor of today's event and the race this weekend. So we'll kick things off with a discussion. And Anna, I'd like to start with you because Volkswagen has announced that it will sell only electric vehicles in the European market starting in 2035. But for the US market, you guys have noted a lack of clarity in the political and infrastructure environment. So in your view, what policies should the US federal government implement to send the right market signal and help VW make progress right here at home?
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. And as many of you know, Volkswagen is a very large multinational corporation. But in the US, we're relatively small with 3% of the market. Still, Volkswagen Group employs over 8,000 people directly. And when you include our dealer body and our R&D centers and our manufacturing base in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is the world's only Platinum LEED certified manufacturing company, we have an impact in the market of over 130,000 people. So pleasure to be here. And as to the policies, look, Volkswagen believes that EV success in the US market is going to require a partnership with the government. And I mean the federal government, and I mean state and local governments. We're going to need to focus on three key segments. One, consumers. Two, infrastructure, as Congressman Tonko just shared. And of course, a manufacturing supply chain that's secure. So first of all, we need non-discriminatory tax incentives, consumer tax incentives. You may know there are proposals right now in Congress that would, I would argue, distort and weaken the US EV market by incorporating discriminatory provisions in EV incentives. These proposals would provide an oversized incentive for a select few, in fact, less than 10% of the EV market, while simultaneously reducing or eliminating incentives for some international nameplates. So as I said, one proposal would provide full tax benefits for only a small segment of the market. I would argue this will seriously dampen EV deployment across the country. And quite frankly, it jeopardizes the president's climate goals, and it could potentially violate WTO rules as well. Second, we need substantial federal investment in EV charging infrastructure. So we're all in committed to the advancement of electric vehicles throughout the nation, but a robust charging network is critical and fundamental towards building an EV future. So we need to strive for greater, we call it convenience parity, so that ensures access to abundant EV charging and infrastructure. Here's some interesting statistics I dug up this morning. The US has about 42,000 EV charging stations, representing 102,000 outlets. Now, a third of those are found in California. There are 45,000 charging stations in Germany alone, 285,000 charging stations in Europe. Now, I recognize, and this was mentioned previously in the conference, that 80 to 90% of charging will occur at home. But if we want to give consumers the confidence they need to know that there's a charging station nearby, we need to increase the availability of these charging stations. And finally, we really need to facilitate the expansion of domestic EV supply chains. So we need to expand federal investments in policy supports for domestic EV battery manufacturing. We need to develop a US-based supply of critical minerals, including extraction, processing, and recycling. And then we need to encourage the domestic manufacturing of critical components, such as semiconductors. So I think those are the three pieces, I would argue, in terms of policy that would really launch a robust EV market in the US.
Thanks, Anna. That's super helpful. And I think it's an important segue. You brought up charging and everything that we need to do to provide consumers some assurances. And so I'd like to turn to Fabio, because you have 70,000 electric vehicles on the road in your footprint, and the New York Evolve program is supporting significant deployment of chargers across the state. So we know that utilities play a critical role in connecting the charging to the grid. What can state and federal policymakers do to ensure that the grid's prepared? And also, what benefits can EVs and charging bring to the grid?
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. And I'm very excited to be here. I'm a big Formula E and Formula One fan. So when I got your invitation, I was like, right on. I'm really excited. Listen, so, you said 70,000 vehicles on the road in New York State. Our goal is 850,000 by 2025. That's a big hockey stick, right? And charging infrastructure, I think Anna mentioned that it's critical to ensure that the range anxiety and, any New Yorker with an EV can travel from point A to point B across New York State. So Let me maybe share a little bit about the NYPA, the New York Power Authority, who we are. So we are the largest state electric utilities in the United States. And we generate about 25% of the electricity in New York, and 80% of that electricity is carbon-free, primarily coming from hydro. As part of the many things that we do as NYPA, we also have a program that you mentioned. It's called Evolve New York. And that's really a visionary program, especially from a state agency, where our goal is by the end of this year to have 150 chargers, very high-speed chargers deployed throughout New York State. And we are committed and ready to scale up to 800 chargers by 2025. And why we're doing this, like I said, we want to remove the charging deserts. We want to make sure that prospective EV drivers and current EV drivers had the confidence to say, yes, I can drive with an EV without getting stranded anywhere, in New York State. And other states are doing similar things, like California and many other states. So I think NYPA has a unique vantage point. We are a utility, but also we are a DC fast charging owner and operator. And if I look at the way we collaborated with the federal government, state government, et cetera, we have a really, really good successes to point to. And I'll just mention two in New York State. We lobbied very actively for make-ready funding. And make-ready means getting the site ready to host the chargers. And many folks don't know this, but about 60% of the cost of developing a site is actually the make-ready. So that's a huge burden, right, to deploy holistically those chargers across the territory. And the second area that I want to point to is demand charge relief. Demand charge is a component of a bill that you get when you operate a fast charging site. And unfortunately, it's very steep in many areas of the country. And by working with the utility to provide reliefs for those charges, we can lower the operating cost of our sites. What opportunities we have? I think we have really three key opportunities going forward. One is we need to fast track the utility interconnection. Meaning, once a site is ready and needs to connect to the grid, we need to make sure that that's done in the most fast way possible. Right now, you go from a month with some utilities to up to 6 months with other utilities. That's too long, right? The second one is developing a carbon framework, whether it's a low carbon fuel standard or any other framework that brings those negative externality into the business case for owning and operating DC fast chargers. And then finally, I think it's important to enabling the electric vehicles and any other distributed energy resources, so solar, energy storage, to contribute to the grid and ensure that we can lower the cost of deploying infrastructure, EV infrastructure throughout the state by minimizing that utility interconnection and utility capital upgrades require sometimes to put that infrastructure in the ground. So I'll stop here, but I'll say, I think it's an exciting time. I think we have an opportunity to work together holistically across federal, state, and utilities. And I think is required, quite frankly, to meet the challenges of the climate change.
Thanks, Fabio. Well, that's super helpful. And now we've talked a little bit about the charging and some of the infrastructure, and you're right, the make ready is critical. It's a lot easier when you're pursuing development to run the wires instead of coming and breaking up concrete and trying to make those adjustments after the fact. So I'm glad you mentioned that. But Paul, when it comes to the actual vehicles, I think often folks think about light duty, but PACCAR's EV trucks have shown that they're just as capable as the internal combustion counterparts. I think a few of them even climbed Pikes Peak last year. So what do we do to change the public perception and get off-takers to realize that it's a real benefit to not only their business, but also to fuel maintenance and service costs and to the environment to really pursue the medium and heavy duty electrification?
Sure. Thank you, Joe. So PACCAR is the manufacturer of Kenworth, Peterbilt, and DAF trucks, which together represent 30% of the heavy truck market in the US and Canada and about 16% of the European truck market. PACCAR is the only remaining American-owned heavy truck manufacturer. And as you mentioned, PACCAR has been an early leader in the design and validation of premium quality electric trucks that have been tested under tough conditions, including places like Pikes Peak. Both Kenworth and Peterbilt are taking orders now for Class 8 electric trucks to be delivered to customers this year. So I think there are several things policymakers can do to help address the challenges associated with the total cost of ownership of electric trucks, including the high battery costs, which create a significant cost differential between electric and diesel-powered trucks, the need for additional heavy-duty charging infrastructure, as others have mentioned, and productivity concerns due to the charging time and range limitations. So first, the Department of Energy recently launched an expanded SuperTruck 3 program, which will focus on accelerating the commercialization of both battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell electric trucks. I want to applaud Secretary Granholm for being a real champion for this program already. And Congress can support her efforts and DOE's efforts by fully funding and ideally increasing funding for the SuperTruck 3 program. To help customers purchase electric trucks, our home state Senator Maria Cantwell has introduced a 30% investment tax credit for electric commercial vehicles, which was recently approved by the Senate Commerce Committee. I think this would be a very good starting point for policymakers as they're looking to support the increased commercialization of medium and heavy-duty electric vehicles. At the same time, Congress should consider eliminating or capping the World War I era federal excise tax on new truck sales, which is already a barrier to the purchase of new clean trucks, but will be an even greater barrier when the 12% excise tax is applied to the higher price of an electric truck. Tax incentives would also help private parties support the build-out of the heavy-duty charging network, which will require a combination of public charging infrastructure and charging at private facilities like travel plazas and trucking terminals or depots. I think this is going to be especially important as we look at how to electrify more long-haul trucking routes. So there's a number of other ideas out there for policymakers that are interested, including things like adjusting hours of service to account for charging times, but we can save those for the discussion.
Thanks, Paul. I'm glad you brought up the federal excise tax. It does seem odd that we would incentivize the vehicles and then also come back and apply a 12% excise tax. So I know that's something that's important for Zeta is to incentivize them, but also then, certainly for the zero emission vehicles, have a waiver for that excise tax. So that's I'm glad that you mentioned that. So Asaf, one of the things that I think we've talked about, some of the site hosts and some of the load capabilities from the utilities, but as an equipment manufacturer, you guys see it all. Tell us what you think the right federal solutions are to really accelerate and catalyze deployment of chargers across the country.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for the question. As you heard earlier, we just spoke about, right? ABB is the leading manufacturer of the chargers, but also the other key energy infrastructure that goes behind the charger, and for a number of other sectors. So we do kind of see the full range there. I think the U.S. government obviously can play a significant role in catalyzing the e-mobility economy. The good news is that the U.S. government has a number of tools at its disposal that it's used in the past for other technologies and industries that it can use again for e-mobility. So there are four in particular that I want to just quickly highlight. The first is doubling down on R&D at the Department of Energy. We've spoken a bit about that. We heard about it from the Secretary. This goes across the value chain from batteries to EV charging to the vehicles to energy management software that integrates the chargers onto the grid. We need the whole gamut of R&D there. The second is supporting new advanced manufacturing operations with tax credits and grants. We have a great program that we used in the past, the 48C tax credit program, which we could reinvigorate here for EVs and EV charging, as well as a loan guarantee program at DOE, which they've been making some really strong moves there on the vehicle side with the great leadership there of Jigar Shah and others. And the third is, investing in charging station deployment, of course. There are a number of programs proposed right now. The 30C tax credit, fixing that program and then extending it is probably the tide that will raise all ships in an area that we really need to focus on. And then the fourth, of course, is supporting workforce development and training. So we need the employees and the trained technicians and engineers to design the vehicles and the supply chain of the future, to manufacture them, and then to deploy them, and then ultimately service them for decades to come. So there are I'd say those four components are areas where we need to focus. The good news is that Congress has a number of programs. Congressman Tonko mentioned a number of them, and the American Jobs Plan does a really good job of taking this comprehensive view and proposes investments all along the value chain. And so I think that kind of all of the above approach is what we need to see. We're really excited to work with others on the panel today and others in the community to really lay the foundation from a policy perspective for the e-mobility economy, which we all know is going to lower costs, create jobs, and ultimately cut emissions, which is why we're here.
Thanks, Asaf. Well, I'm one that personally believes that the vehicles need to sell themselves. Obviously, there's the performance and torque and certainly the fuel maintenance and service savings that are attractive to consumers. But as has been noted on the panel already, it's hard to ignore the climate impacts and the carbon emissions reductions that we can achieve with electrification. And I think that's an important part for many consumers as they're thinking through how can they contribute, how can they make a difference on climate change. So Fabio, I wanted to go back to you because in New York, drivers have a carbon emissions equivalent to driving a 250 miles per gallon car. That's what the grid supports for an electric vehicle driver in the state. How can the federal government help promote electric production and renewable energy resources so that EVs purchased all across the country can continue to run on even cleaner energy?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So let me start with saying New York State has a very advanced framework when it comes to thinking about reducing GHG emission from the entire value chain. And so our goals are 100% zero emission electricity by 2040 and 85% reduction overall in GHG emissions by 2050. And so this is where really the power generation sector and the transportation sector are really interlinked. And we really need to advance the ball on both courts, right? And so if I think about how we do that, right? So the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, CLICPA, here in New York State, has some very ambitious goal for generation. So we have 9 gigawatt of wind, 6 gigawatt of solar, and 3 gigawatt of energy storage over a period of time. And then also thinking that GHG emission account for 36% of the overall emissions in New York State. I mean, this is pretty straightforward, right? This is how we need to do it. The challenge is going to be, exactly where is the funding going to come from? And so when we think about the role of the federal government in all this, is really to tackle both the power sector, and by power sector I mean really the generation, the transmission, and the distribution, making sure that there are frameworks, there are incentives to continue to develop infrastructure, to ultimately being able to host certainly EV charging, but all the other renewables that we're talking about, right? On the one hand. And then the second hand is all the set of incentives related to electric vehicles, charging station, and the entire ecosystem that ultimately will need to be developed together with the grid. The last point that I want to make is when we talk about distributed energy resources, there is a huge opportunity. That opportunity is to make those resources intelligent and make them assets to the grid rather than a burden to the grid. And so if we can develop a framework, together with the ISO, with the distribution utility, and I think there is a lot of legislation right now, FERC Order 2222 is an example, right? And so this is really coming down the pike, and we're going to see a lot of the legislation and a lot of the framework and platforms being developed, and ultimately those resources being a contributor to the grid. So it's an exciting time, like I said, and a lot of moving parts. We need to nail it, though, because we don't have a lot of time.
Thanks, Fabio. Well, Paul, I know you know your buyers well, and I think sometimes the medium and heavy duty sector is overlooked. But I think from a carbon standpoint, I think the vehicles as a 8 to 9% representation of total vehicles on the road. I think sometimes it's overlooked that they can represent 30% of carbon emissions and over 50% of the emissions that really impact public health. So knowing your buyers, what do you need to do, and what does the federal government need to do? Again, in addition to the Cantwell investment tax credit that you mentioned, but how do we actually really drive adoption in the medium and heavy duty space?
So I think, those incentives are important. I think also in making sure the supply chains are are open. I mean, and we're moving battery production, cell production back to the U.S. where we can. I think, as we've seen with issues like semiconductors right now, which are going to be increasingly important in electric vehicles, making sure that we have access to the parts, the components we need, that our suppliers can get the right components, and that we're building electric trucks in the U.S. and incentivizing that. To the extent there are advanced manufacturing tax credits that could incentivize the production of both trucks and components here in the U.S., those are helpful. So I think that, customers, we have a lot of customers that are looking to, they're taking pen to paper right now to make the equation work out because they want to invest in electric vehicles. And so providing the incentives to help them do that until the cost differential decreases, while also building out the charging network and addressing some of the, we sell to businesses, and so they are in business to make a profit. And so making sure that they know that there's going to be a reliable infrastructure network, and that the amount of uncertainty that we can reduce is always going to be very important for our customers. So.
Well, thanks, Paul. Yeah, and I think last month there was a report by the Berkeley National Lab that suggested there was $200,000 in savings over the life of some of these medium and heavy duty vehicles. And so hopefully the net present value of those savings make a lot of sense, and we get a lot of uptake, and you're able to move a lot of these zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles. But Anna, going back to you on the light duty side, obviously for consumers, I think one thing that's important to know is that as a country, we sell about 14 million new vehicles every year, but 41 million used vehicles. And so the numbers just bear out that 70% of Americans or more are not in the market for a new car. And one of the impediments to electrification has been the sense that you need to be able to afford a new car. But you guys are working really hard to drive down the price of electrification in some of the models. And I know the ID4 is something that you guys are bringing to market. What are you guys doing to really drive down the price and make it more accessible for consumers lower down on the income bracket?
You may have heard the statement from our chairman that Volkswagen wants to build EVs for the millions, not the millionaires. So we are looking to very much to reduce the price. One of the things we're doing is we currently import the ID4, but we will be building that in Chattanooga because we like to build vehicles where we sell them. So, but that, again, we're very, very interested. When you look at the scope of our brands, including Audi, we're bringing more and more EVs to the market and are committed to full electrification of the fleet and completely aligned with the Paris Climate Accords and with the President Biden's desire to electrify the fleet. One of the things, as I mentioned, building them here, that's an $800 million investment for that platform in Chattanooga. And we're hiring another 1,000 people, which again is something that the president, I'm hoping, is seeing that that's 1,000 more good paying American jobs right here in the U.S. So one of the things that we think that could accelerate adoption of EVs, certainly our ID4 is, with the tax credits goes from $41,000, that's a $7,500 tax credit. One of the things that our dealers are asking for, and we recognize might be very, very helpful, is to make the EV tax credit fully refundable and assignable. The dealers call it cash on the hood. By allowing the rebates to be utilized at the point of sale, we think that would, increase the value to the customer. And then we're looking to advocate for a credit boost for low and middle income families as well. We think boosting the credit would better support middle income families. And, as they look to go electric, we want to make sure that we're advancing the goal of widespread electrification and availability. And we also believe that, we're not supportive of price caps. The more EVs in the market, the better. It advances the president's climate goals. But as I mentioned previously, and as other panelists have mentioned, we need greater EV charging access. So, expanding the nation's publicly accessible charging network through federal investments and tax incentives will certainly help drive EV adoption across the country. And then, as Congressman Tonko noted, we need to expand federal investment in charging infrastructure installation in multi-unit dwellings. particularly in underserved and disadvantaged communities. One of the companies that Volkswagen is closely aligned with, of course, is Electrify America. And they're really looking, particularly in California right now, to increase charging availability in low and middle class neighborhoods to raise awareness of EVs as an option, and then working with the federal government and with state governments, trying to increase incentives for low and middle income individuals so they can consider the purchase of an EV.
Well, Anna, that's a great segue. But before I do want to thank you for your work in Tennessee. And I'll note that the Republican Governor Bill Lee recently announced an advanced battery plant and called it the single biggest investment in economic development in the state's history. And so all that really makes a difference as we all advocate for electrification of the transportation sector, because we've got to be able to make this a win for everybody. And what you're doing is really important. So Asaf, this will be the final question, but I know Anna mentioned disproportionately impacted and certainly frontline communities, but there's also rural areas. How do we make sure that, when we have market-based mechanisms that may leave certain communities behind, that we're doing our due diligence and really deploying the charging to make electrification accessible for them as well?
Yeah. Joe, you raised a really important feature of EVs, which is that there is no one-size-fits-all for how drivers charge their vehicles. Personal cars are different from transit buses, which are different from delivery vans and long-haul trucks. But the same does go for geography as well, right? Do you have a personal garage where you can charge your own car? Or do you live in a multi-unit dwelling or an apartment building? And so we need policies that support and encourage charging in those places. So, for example, we need to incentivize building owners to install charging for their residents. We need EV-ready building codes so that it's easy to plug in chargers as the vehicles start to get on the road. And then we also need DC fast chargers deployed in communities where they don't have the ability for home charging, or where they have a building landlord who is not willing to make the investment for the charging. Or if you look around here in New York City, where parking is very limited, we need access to community charging hubs where folks can have access to those chargers. One of the kind of business model challenges that policy can help fill is that chargers are being installed where they have sufficient utilization to make a return on their investment. So in areas where EV adoption is still low, like in some rural areas or in some frontline communities, we need incentives to help fill that gap so that you can have a charger there that might not make much money right now for a business to install there, but there is a government interest in fixing that market failure to the moment to make sure that everyone has access to those chargers. So, I think we kind of need to take an all hands on deck approach and making sure that the benefits of the e-mobility economy, which ultimately is going to be lower costs for folks, is that those benefits are distributed equally to all members of society and to all Americans. And that's how we'll be successful in the long run.
Well, that's a great place to end it. Asaf, Fabio, Paul, Anna, thank you so much for helping to educate us. Theo, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Joe, and a very warm thank you, of course, to all the other esteemed panelists, and a very warm thank you to you, Stephanie, for joining me here.
Absolutely, thank you.
Good. Now we've come to the end of today's program, but please stay with us for a couple of more minutes. For those of you joining us through the ABB virtual experience, you've come now to the ABB's information hub, where you can find out more information about ABB Formula E and the race weekend tomorrow and on Sunday. So please take some time to explore the immersive environment that we have created for you all and learn about the ABB Formula E World Championship, this weekend's race, and even explore a 3D model of the racetrack here in Brooklyn. An instructional video will follow for you shortly on the screen. And finally, don't forget to watch both races of the ABB New York City E-Prix. Tune in tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on CBS Sports Network and Sunday at 1 p.m. on CBS. From me, a very warm thank you for joining us all here today. I wish you a fantastic Friday and a great race weekend. Thank you so much.